All right, we're live.
Hey,
So
guys.
welcome everybody. Everybody in the chat, welcome. I'm not going to go through and call out names because we have want to get started on time and get going here. I am going to introduce the panel just in case everyone doesn't know who's here. We have a couple other people coming up still. There's Stephanie beside me there, Aquarium Life. If you're not subbed to her, I don't know why. You need to get over there and do it. And we all know Skipper. If you don't, you're missing out there. We all know Pam, Punchy Paints, also known as Sketchy. Mentioned you in a video last night, Pam, or Sketchy at least. And Rob is one of our LFS owners, Aquatic Aesthetics, and he's also a hobbyist. So, and there went Skipper. So he will be back, and there he is. Mary Paige Flynn, thank you for the super sticker. Appreciate it so much. I can't see what it says on here. But as you can see from the links that the mods are sharing, we have a special guest tonight. And when I say that, I mean special in the sense that he has become very well respected in the way he keeps his fish room, the way he breeds his fish. He will tell you up front he's not an expert, but he does have experience and he has things that he can share with us that work for him. So I'm going to bring up Tom of Team Aquatics, and I'll let you talk to him. Spit it out, Bob. And
hey, Bob.
Welcome.
Hey, Mafia. How's everybody doing?
Good. Yourself?
Doing fantastic. Before I get started, I think there's something important that I really need to address and acknowledge. Before I get going, I just want to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day, the most important job God ever created. So, for those that are mothers, happy Mother's Day. Hopefully you had a terrific, terrific day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Pam,
What?
Miss Punchy Paints. You have wonderful tastes in discus, by the way, because I was looking at your website, and I don't know if you can see that picture to my, let's see, this side.
Yes.
That probably looks very familiar to you. I saw that. I think that might have been an oil that you did.
Yeah.
I don't know what type of discus those are, if those are some type of pigeon blood or what they are, but it looked very similar to one of my old discus that I had, which is an albino red spotted green that I kept for many, many years. But I saw that and it's like, oh my gosh, the similarities were incredible. So you have excellent taste. And I do like, I have to mention, Pam, that your picture of the artisan, I absolutely love that picture, the artisan.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, there's just so many things going on in that picture that kind of speak to me. So as far as I'm concerned, for me, you nailed it on that one. So well done. Very impressive.
That one won Best in Show at the Cheyenne Frontier Days one year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Pretty awesome.
Beautiful, beautiful picture. And I do want to ask, Skipper, I know you lost some L333s and some L66s recently.
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
Well, it was stupidity, actually. I forgot to turn the power strip back on, and it got too cold. Because I turned the heaters off because I was doing a big water change on all the tanks on that row, and it was going down below the line, and I didn't want to ruin the heaters. So I turned this off, and I forgot to turn it back on when I was done.
Okay. Have you ever considered, just some advice, have you ever considered a heater controller?
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with what those are, I'm going to pull them up. And there's two types, and I use them on all of my Pleco tanks for a few reasons. This first one here, if you can see that, that's an Inkbird 308. And the nice thing about this, I use this on tanks where it only requires one heater. I'm going to block myself out. If you can see the plug there, it has one that says cooling and one that says heating. So these would be good on like a tank if you're running a chiller and a heater. But if you have a single tank with one heater, this would be a good option for you. What I also really like about this one, Skipper, is this heater controller also has an audible alarm on it. So what you're going to do is you're going to set your temperature range. Maybe it's 78 to 82. And if it goes higher than that, you'll get an alarm. If it goes below that, you'll get an alarm. But the nice thing about it is you can just unplug the heater from the heater controller when you're doing those big water changes and your heater is out of water, if you will. There's another one that I also use in the fish room, and that's the Inkbird 306. And this one, if you see the plug, both of those are for heaters. This one does not have an audible alarm, but I do use this on my larger tanks, because my larger tanks, I always have two smaller heat. I don't like big heaters. I like smaller heaters, but I can plug in two smaller heaters into this one. So just something to point out. And one very, very important note, though, if you do look at either one of these two heater controllers, you need to make sure, I'm going to block myself again. If you see that probe in the middle, it's got a little black probe. That is aquarium safe. Their original heater controllers, when they came out, if you see this model here, and you see that probe, let's see, right here to the right, it's a metal probe. And a lot of people were buying those, and they were actually advertising these heater controllers as aquarium safe. And these probes were not ever designed to be submersed for continual use in an aquarium. And I wrote Inkbird, and they responded, because I had a lot of them fail on me within weeks. And then they sent me all new controllers and new probes. So just make sure if you buy one of these for a tank that it has that little black aquarium safe probe, and then you'll be problem free and not have to worry about it. I've had them running now for years and never had any issue other than those metal probes. So you might want to consider something like that just for future reference. And they don't cost like much. I think $28, $30, give or take. So real inexpensive. And when you look at the price of your L333s and your 66s that you bought, a $30 heater controller probably would have saved you quite a bit of money there. So but it happens. It happens though.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the bad things about them fish, they were given to me from friends. That really hurt me.
Tough break. But I've lost entire colonies of fish. So it happens. It's part of the hobby, and I don't think anybody can say they've been in this hobby for more than whatever amount of time and never lost a fish. We've all lost fish. So, and then I do also want to say, Skipper, I need more friends like you, because I saw that RO system that you were just gifted. So that is outstanding. Right. So lucky,
that was crazy.
Lucky you. But no, I do appreciate the offer coming on a live streaming, Bob, and Tennessee Fish Mafia. I figured it was probably good for my health that I accept the invitation, because you do not want to upset the Mafia, and especially the comment. So I like my legs in one piece. So
there you go.
It is what it is. But you're right, Bob. One thing that I always do like to point out when I'm talking, or on my YouTube videos, I have a channel, TM Aquatics, and I think I just hit 15,700 subs today. It's not a big channel. But one thing I've learned with YouTube, Plecos and Corydoras, it just doesn't drive the clicks like somebody who's keeping African cichlids or discus or things like that. And that's all right. I'm not on YouTube I don't care about the sub numbers. It's nice, but that's not my primary goal. It's more just to document my fish room and how I evolve through the hobby, just kind of more for personal reasons, and the fact that other people like to watch and get some benefit from it. That's just icing on the cake. So, but one thing I do like to mention in all of my videos, and I might miss it from time to time, but I like to mention that I am by far from being an expert. I am not an expert. I'm no different than anybody else. And one of the channels that I do like to watch is Michael's Fish Room. And Michael's kind of a neat guy, but he always says he's just a stupid guy with a camera, and he doesn't try to set himself up to be an expert. I'm the same way. I've never claimed to be, nor will I ever try to position myself or portray myself as an expert. The experts in this, with the type of fish that I keep, I'd consider Eric Bodrox, Jeremy Bash, Rob McClure, Ian Fuller. Those are the people that really study, go out collecting, and keep hundreds of species for dozens and dozens. They know what they're talking about. But with that being said, I have been in the hobby for quite a while. Some of my earliest memories, and I'm not going to give my age, but I forget the gentleman that just had the accident with his finger. I'm older than you, but I'm not as old as Pam. But some of my earliest, no offense,
Nobody's
Pam.
as old as Pam, Tom.
Oh, shots fired.
Oh
Yes.
my God, I'm out of here.
But some of my earliest childhood memories, honest to gosh, are going down in my basement where my dad had a rack of tanks. And he had 2 racks, and one rack had a bunch of 5s and then a 30-gallon. And back in the day, these were all the metal rimmed glasses, and I think there was like some type of black tar that held all the frame on, but they were the metal framed tanks. But he had a 30-gallon. Back in the day, I thought that was just incredibly huge. That was so cool. But then he had another rack with a bunch of 5 gallons and a bunch of 10 gallons. And I just remember going down there and watching a kissing gourami. Dan's Fish just highlighted some spiny eels. I think he called them like yellowtail spiny eels. We had a spiny eel, and that was really cool because it would like to bury itself in the substrate. And we just thought that was the neatest thing. But guppies, mollies, platies, all that type of stuff. But and my brother was also into that as well. As we got a little bit older, Dad kind of phased out of it, but my brother and I still wanted to keep the tank. So him and I started, assuming responsibility for those tanks, if you will. I was probably maybe 10 years old at that point. And one of my first tanks that I got to set up my way was a bunch of guppies. And this would make Michael at Michael's Fish Room proud. I just threw a bunch of guppies in there and just bred tons and tons of mutt guppies, I think is what he calls them. But I just thought that was the neatest thing, how you could throw all, these different types of guppies in, and every time they would spawn, something different would come out of it. And I just thought that was really neat. But we did the whole gamut, African cichlids. I've kept reef tanks, not big reef tanks, but smaller reef tanks. I've kept big saltwater tanks, though. I bred a lot of African cichlids, the live bears. I've been through it all, but more recently, I've kind of started migrating, if you will, more towards Plecos and Corydoras. And why Plecos and Corydoras? Really no special reason other than not everyone else is doing it. And the more I started, looking into these fish, the more fascinated I became with them, and how specialized they are, how similar but yet different they can be. And it's just been, for me, it's probably been one of the best parts of the hobby for me. It's just been the last 3 or 4 years keeping these Plecos and Corydoras. I really, truly, absolutely love these fish. But that's kind of my background, where I came from. My brother's still in the hobby, and the nice thing is we've had this common bond. He's 6 years older than I, but he has a fish room about the same size as I do. Actually, it's a little bit bigger, actually, and he has more Plecos than I do. But we have that common bond. Even going back to when we were teenagers and we could drive, or he could drive, we would get in the car and, we would go to the fish stores and make the rounds, as we call it. And we still do that to this day. And it's just kind of a neat experience that we get to still share. But he has about 40 fish tanks. I think he has about 12 different species of Plecos, ranging from Scobian cistrus and Hypan cistrus, ancestris species, and Pseudocanthicus. And then he has a bunch of Corydoras as well, probably 15 types of Cory. So between them, and we don't like to overlap. There's a few species that we both have just because we love the species. And when that happens, we will share fish to try and balance out colonies and so forth. And that's kind of nice. But otherwise, we try not to overlap. And a lot of the species he's keeping, I'm not keeping. But anyways, with that being said, I did put together, with Bob's permission, a small presentation, or it's actually more or less a fish room tour of TM Aquatics. And I'm going to take you through my fish room. It's about 10 minutes long, so my apologies if it puts you to sleep, but we'll do our best to get through it together. But I do want to start out in the rec room like I usually do with most of my fish room tours. I always start out in the rec room with my planted 75-gallon tank. And I'm going to go ahead and actually at this point I'm going to cover my lens so you can actually see the tank and not me.
Tom, if I could just interject very quickly. He cannot see the stream, and since he doesn't know everybody on the panel and in the chat, let's hold our questions, please, till after he's finished. Just remember what you were looking at in the video and that kind of thing to reference back, because he can't pause it and go back to things either. So, all right, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Bob. So this is my Planet 75 that I have out in my rec room. I have 2 tanks out there, and I try to keep those tanks looking more like display tanks because it is in our rec room where we entertain and we spend a lot of time. But to be honest, this is probably the tank that is my least favorite right now. It has nothing to do with the fish that are in there, which I have some red coral pencil fish. I have fewer in there now because I've moved some out. I've also moved some to another fish room to try and spawn in another fish room, and then I have a bunch back in my fish room as well. But red coral pencil fish, there's a couple rice fish still in there that I missed when I was trying to net them out. There's a couple of cherry barbs in there, and then I have a big group of Corydoras sucis in there, which are a real neat looking Corydoras species. I have a picture, but I don't want to overlay that over the video right now. But they're all wild caught, but they're really, really tough Corydoras to breed. If memory serves, they're in the lineage 8, which happens to be one of the tougher lineages of Corydoras to breed. We won't get too deep in the woods and nerd out on lineages with Corydoras, but this is probably my least favorite tank that I have right now because this is what it. Whoops, hold on. Let's see. Hold on. I want to open up this one right here. I used to, let me back up here. I've been in the hobby my entire life, and I've always had tanks. But when the kids were going through school, I scaled back to where I only had maybe 1 or 2 tanks. When they started leaving the house, graduating school, and moving out, I did start getting back into the hobby a little more. And this was the first tank that I really went all out on when I got back into the hobby a little more on a full-time basis, if you will. And I never kept a high-tech planted tank, but I thought I'd give it a try, and this was the result. And I absolutely love this tank. But for anybody that's considering a high-tech planted tank, it is a lot of work. I was adding fertilizers every day. It's called EI dosing. I was EI dosing the stem plants you needed to trim every week. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. But this was the first tank that I set up, and I do miss that because it just looks, in my opinion, a lot nicer than this here. So I'm actually thinking about going back to a planted tank with this one here. Also out in the rec room, I have a 120-gallon tank. Hold on, let me pull that one up here. And that I have a bunch of L134 leopard frog plecos. And then I also have 6 of these albino threadfin acaras, and I picked those up from Dan's Fish, and they've like tripled or quadrupled in size. I absolutely just love those fish. But this tank, I'm also disappointed in to where I actually might tear it down. And my son just picked up a couple of Oscars, and he has a 75-gallon tank, and those Oscars are getting pretty big. And I was going to ask Susie, I don't know if Susie popped in or not, because I know she has Oscars, and I was going to ask her thoughts on keeping 2 Oscars in a 75 or if they'd be better off in a 120. But I was thinking about tearing this down and giving this tank to my son. But right now in there's about 30 L134s. There's a big colony of plecos, and they're pretty young, but they have spawned a few times. No successful spawns yet. And then again, those threadfin acaras. Now, before I had the plecos, this is what that tank looked like. I had a bunch of discus in there, Skittles discus tank, if you will. And this was probably my favorite tank with that Planet 75.
Oh, wow.
That's how these 2 tanks looked in the rec room. And I look back at this footage at what they used to look like versus what they look like now. And it makes me want to change. So those tanks, especially the 75 will probably be changed. The 120, like I mentioned, it might actually go away, but we'll see. But anyways, enough on that. We're going to head back to the fish room, and I'll show you what's going on back there. As we come into the fish room, this is a shared room with my wife for her storage stuff. She gets one half, I get the other. But we've got this triple rack of 40 breeders. And this is a recent change that I made. And up on the top tank, I have some L471 mini snowballs that I picked up from Dan's Fish. I also have some L174. Both of those are pretty small high pan citrus species. And I like to keep the smaller plecos personally. I've never really been a big tank person. Big tanks require big heaters, which require big heating bills. But the previous were the 471s. This is one of the L174s, both just absolutely beautiful little fish. And I think I have 12 or 13 of each. The bottom two tanks are both currently being used for grow outs for my L134 leopard frog plecos. And in this tank, actually, this one's a little heavily stocked. I don't know if it's 55 or 60, something like that in there. But they're not real big at this point. This bottom also has a bunch of L134s, and these are the older juveniles. And actually, I've been selling a lot. I think I've sold like 20, close to 25 just in this past week. So I don't know how many are left in there, maybe 20 or 25, but those are the older ones that I'm shipping out. This rack over here, just to the left of the triple 40s, I have a 33 on the top, 55 in the middle, and then a 40 long down on the bottom. And this was actually the second rack that I added into my fish room. But up on the top is where I keep my group of zebra plecos. And probably one of my top 3 favorite plecos, period. And I just like them. It's just fish I've always liked since I was a small kid. And then in the 55, this is where I have my wild caught group of L134s. And these are the fish that have produced all those young and all those juveniles. Actually, that last cave that I just showed, I think I might pan back over to it. It's kind of a darker circular or deep cave right there. I just noticed that he has a female trapped in there. Just noticed that today. So these guys haven't spawned for me in 2 months, and now I've got a trapping again, so I'm pretty excited. Now on this bottom 40 long, this is where I have a real neat fish called a Scleromystax barbatus. It's in the same family as Corydoras. It's in the Pleco family. These are a lineage 3 catfish. What I like them on, they just get this real prehistoric look to them and big pectoral fins, and I just think they're a neat fish, but they're cooler water fish, and they like those temperatures around 70 to 72. They can go down a little cooler. They really don't like it above 76. So because of that, they really don't sell very well. Over here, I have 5 grow out tanks, and these are all on out of water change with tap water. But this is where I move Corydoras to and finish growing out the Corydoras. And these first 2 tanks, there's probably 100 green lasers. In this tank here, there's some Venezuelan orange. And then there's also in that same tank, I don't know why I repanned over here, but in that same tank with the orange Venezuelanus, there's some Corydoras bozemanii. And then over in this last end tank, there's some orange lasers and then Corydoras kanakis. And those kanakis came from Eric Bodrock in his fish room. And from what I understand, he actually collected his adult breeders personally on a trip to Peru. Now over here on this side of the fish room, as we come in and hook a left, we've got a bunch of 10 gallons and then some 40-gallon breeders and a 29-gallon tank. And all these 10-gallon tanks on the top I use for Corydoras grow-outs. These are Axelrodi and bozemanii. These right here are green lasers. This here is a bunch of Corydoras kanakis. More green lasers growing out in here. These are Corydoras black diamonds, the CW49. These are Corydoras duplicarius. And then these are just on the very end. Those are some tinies. I haven't been able to identify them yet, so they're probably a mix of a few different species. But that's what we have going on up there. These are the Corydoras, the CW49s. These can be a challenge for people, and other people breed them like they're, bronze cories or Corydoras paleatus or albino cories or whatever. So, but a lot of people have a challenge with these. I think they're absolutely beautiful, beautiful Corydoras. They're not easy to source, that is for sure. Over here, these are my Corydoras equus. I have about 22 wild-caught equus in here. And these are another one that are extremely challenging to breed. And I did have a recent spawn, but it was unsuccessful. But I did find eggs, but nothing came of that. So I'm on the right path with that. Down below, this is a 29-gallon tank. This is where I have a bunch of Corydoras Weitzmanni, which is a newer addition to my fish room. I picked these up over a Cataclysm this past fall. I forget who I purchased these from. Might have been Andy Hudson. I forget who I got these from, but just a real beautiful fish. They used to be considered the holy grail of Corydoras about 6, 7, 8 years ago. And then the newest addition at TM Aquatics is, or one of the newest additions, are these Corydoras Schultzii Black. And I picked up 10, then just added 7 more from a fish club auction we had last week. And I've only had them in my fish room for 9 or 10 weeks now. They were juveniles. They're barely hitting puberty right now. But yesterday I was able to pick a bunch of eggs. They actually spawned for me already, which was absolutely incredible. So this rack over here, this is the OG rack. This is where the fish room started with these 6 tanks, a couple of 20 long, a couple of standard 20s, and a couple of 40 breeders. Up on the top shelf, we have some Duplicarius over there. Ignore the water parameters. That's for when I kept some shrimp in the tank. These are the Corydoras Duplicarius, and these are a favorite by a lot of people. Very, very colorful. These here, the Corydoras Axelrodi, they're on my short list. They're going to be on their way out. They didn't do much for me this year. They don't sell very well, but I need that tank for something else. These are the Corydoras Bozemanni, and these are a real hard to source Corydoras as well. And a lot of people think they look like Hasbrosis, which I can see that, but they get a lot bigger than your dwarf Corydoras. But the Corydoras Bozemanni, and actually they just had about a 70 egg drop today. Wow. And I did go through and pick them, but the success rate, the hatch rate's been really low all year with them, so I don't know what's going to result of that. Down here, these are my green lasers, which you can't see, but believe it or not, there's about 16 or 18 green lasers in there. They are one Corydoras, this group anyways, that they never come out. They just don't like coming out. And then these are the adult Corydoras venezuelanus. And these fish breed very readily, and there were probably, I don't know, 15, 20 spawns I didn't even pick. These are the Corydoras kanakis. Their common name is the Morse code Corydoras. I just like the spotted pattern on them. And again, those I picked up from Eric Bodrock. Now these 2 tanks over here, these are double stacked 75-gallon tanks. And these are on automatic water change system. It mixes tap water and RO. The top tank is where I keep my group of L494. They're a Picoltia, so they're related to the L134 leopard frog Pleco. They're called the Picoltia Rio Peru. I got my original 8 from Eric Bodrock, and then I picked up 2 more from my buddy Patrick, who got his breeders from Eric Bodrock as well. But I do have an issue with this tank right now, and if I remember, I'll talk about it later. But down below on the bottom 75, this is where I have my L397s. They're Pinaculus or Pinaculus, however you want to pronounce it. And I did have an issue with this tank last year. I lost a lot of my breeders. And then my orange lasers are unfortunately in purgatory in this tank, but I'm going to be swapping them out, the orange lasers, for the Corydoras Axelrodi. Over here, another 40 breeder. This is a grow out tank, nothing special to look at. I've got 23 L397s that are a real nice size right now, 2.5, 3 inches. So a bunch of those are available. And then I do have some new other fish in there as well. This rack here, this is my newest addition. This is a triple stack rack of the new Aqueon 60 breeders. And on this bottom rack, or the bottom tank, there's a bunch of Scleromystax. This middle tank, those are all Corydoras orange venezuelanus growing up. And then in the very top tank, this is where I have my big group of L260 Queen Arabesque Plecos. And these were all spawned and bred here at TM Aquatics. And it is my plan to reduce the amount of fish that I have in this tank, because I just think 29 is just going to be too much. So I'm going to bring it down to about 20 or so. Now the back room tour and some of the mechanics. I do use RODI in my fish room. I mix, not RODI, just RO water. I do mix RO with tap water. My tap water here comes out of the tap at 8.4, 8.5 pH, but the TDS is off the chart at like 450. So I like to cut my tap water. I mix it usually around 3-to-1, tap versus RO. I do have central air system in my fish room with a closed loop system like most people do in big fish rooms as well. I have 2 different pumps. I have AP100 that I currently have, and then I have a backup pump, and this here's a Gemco LPH80. I also have an Alita AL6 over here on the other side, and that's plugged into a CyberPower UPS, a backup battery system. And on that Alita AL6, I have one line going into each one of the tanks over here. The 3 tanks on this middle rack, and then one line goes to a sponge filter in those triple 40s. And if I lose power, that Cyber Power backup has enough juice in it to power that AL6 for like 32 hours or something like that. So that was it. I think we're back to the beginning of the tour. So I'm going to change the background here real quick, Bob. And take the lens and
Wow.
put myself again. So that was the fish room. So you know, I know that was pretty quick, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So but you know, that's what we have going on at TM Aquatics and what's in my fish room. So let me know if there's any questions on what you guys just saw.
Well, there's one right now in chat from George at Aquaballs, and he wants to know on the Corydoras, what do you feed them for the first week of their life?
So with my Corys, when the Corydoras eggs hatch, I don't feed anything for the first 2 days. They're still absorbing. You know, when they first hatch, they just look like little eggs with tails. So they've got enough yolk sac to go a couple days without anything. I should note that when I hatch out Corydoras, I usually have a bunch of Java moss in the little plastic tote. When I bounce the eggs in tumblers, when they hatch, I transition them to little plastic totes, and then there's Java moss in there with an air stone. There's a bunch of little critters on that Java moss they can pick at if they can fit it in their mouth. But starting on about day 3, microworms is what I feed. And then I do also feed some golden pearls, some real small golden pearls. Like I think it's 50 to 100 micron is the size, or because I know there's a smaller size, 5 to 50, but 50 to 100 micron golden pearls is a dry food that I'll also feed. And they get a little bit bigger after about 4 or 5 days. After that, when I start feeding microworms, I do that for 3 to 4 days or so. And then they're usually big enough to start eating brine shrimp. And then once they're on live baby brine shrimp, it's lots and lots of live baby brine shrimp. So
Okay.
I do that until they're a lot bigger. When they're maybe about a quarter or 3/8 of an inch, they usually get moved into a larger system, 10-gallon tank or whatnot. And then they're getting fed what all the others are getting fed. There's a growth formula that Ken's fish, that he makes. And he's got a bunch of different sizes, size 0, 1, 2, 3. I get the size 0 and size 1. It's a really high protein, high fat. It's a good food for the Corys, and all my Corydoras just love it. And on top of it, it doesn't cost too much, but I feed that. I feed a lot of blackworm sticks or pellets. They're sticks, I think, blackworm sticks. And then Rapashi, spawn and grow, and grub pie mixed together. I'll feed that to my Corys growing them out. But I start them out, the first food is microworms, followed by live baby brine shrimp. Lots of it.
Awesome. And thank you for the thorough answer. I appreciate it. We've got several questions now. The first one is from Maria Z, and she says, does your brother have a fish channel? And would you ever tour his channel on your channel?
No. No cameras allowed in his fish room. So we're to be honest, we're both very private people. But here I am, putting myself out there on YouTube for the world. But He's even more so. So he won't even let me film it. So normally, in fact, when pre-COVID apocalypse, anytime somebody came over to buy fish from me, I would always offer a fish room tour. If they want to come down, if they want to pick out their fish, if they want to look at the breeders, if they want to look at my fish room, and just see if it met their expectations or whatever. And most of the people, about 90% of the people would do that. My brother never allowed that. No one's ever been in his fish room except him, his family, and me. So it just is his, it's how he is, and I respect that. But as far as getting a tour, no, all I would say is look at my fish room, mirror that, add a few more tanks, and that's his fish room. So,
Okay.
I did want to mention Maria Z. I think Maria Z had Corydoras equus and had a shortage of females, had a lot more males and maybe only one or two females. So Maria Z, if you can, message me offline somewhere, somehow. I post my email in a lot of my videos, or maybe Bob can show you my Facebook Messenger name and whatever. But I have an excess of adult females, so maybe if you're still looking or interested, maybe there's something there that we can talk about. So
she said yes. Sorry, Bob. She said yes, she did, and she will get in contact with you.
Okay, perfect.
Next question's from Bunny Viper, and she wants to know what's the difference between an L397 and L398, please. Why is one so much more popular than the other?
Well, the 397s are a lot more colorful than the 398. The 398s look very similar to a lot of the other tiger plecos. They just don't have that deep orange coloration. And the L398s have been a lot more readily available in the hobby. If you go back maybe 3 years ago, it was very, very difficult to find L397s, and they still commanded a pretty good price. But they came into the market, in the last few years. They're not a real challenging pleco to breed. They're still a very colorful pleco, and they do well for us. But it's just the 397. They just haven't been around as much. They're not as readily available. They're more colorful, so they're more desirable. But if you're interested in either one of those, I would recommend that you not get either. I would recommend that you get the L306, and I believe Stephanie has L306. I've had the opportunity to add those to my collection as well, but the 306, the 397s, as they get older, they don't look as nice as they do when they're juveniles. When they're juveniles, they look fantastic. In fact, let me see. I've got a picture of them somewhere, I'm sure.
Tom, while you're looking for that, whenever you're done, can you, by chance, mention what you feed your Panox? I know you did it in a video, but that was a while ago. I'm just curious. Yeah,
so this is an L397, and that's going to be a younger fish right there. They lose a lot of that color as they get older. They still look great, but the L306s, when they get older, they still maintain a lot of their juvenile colors, and they're just a more vivid color fish. Now, also with the 397, and I'm not going to duck out of the way, but you can see that they have orange bands and black bands. But in between the orange band and black band, there's also a little bit of clear, skin, if you will, or it almost looks like white or clear. The 306s have a very instant contrast from black to orange. Their lines are a little more defined, where with the 306s, I just think because that transition from black to clear or white to orange, they just don't look as nice if you follow what I'm saying. So, but look for the 306s if you're interested in either one of those. Yes, you're going to pay a little bit more, but if you get them to spawn, you're gonna get your money back, tenfold. So, but
I think she said she followed up. Bunny Viper did and said thanks.
Okay.
Oh, she was actually thanking somebody else for a comment they made. Oh. She couldn't tell the difference in the 97s and the 398s.
Yeah, I'm going to cover the lens again. The 397, not only is it a more vivid color and than the 398s, the the head pattern, the stripes on the worm line on the 397s is very tight, very small worm line pattern, and there's no other Pleco like that. So they have a very, very distinct pattern on their heads as well. So look for that, the coloration, the head pattern, and it's pretty easy to tell the two.
And I believe these are on your Get Guild store right now, aren't they? Or did you sell out?
I actually just took them down because next I did open my store and I sold more fish than I really want to ship this week. I'm going to be extremely busy, but I actually just left the Barbados on there because next week I can't ship any more orders this week, Bob. I got too many. But next week the temperatures drop again, so we're back into the 50s. I'll open it and put other fish on there, when it warms up and stays warm. But what are you going to do? So
Right. That was Stephanie that asked the question. Would you mind re-asking that aquarium line?
Yeah, Tom, I was just curious what you fed your panocs, your panoculus primarily.
So I have a few foods that I feed them, Stephanie. I do like to feed them rapashi. I'll usually mix morning wood with a Soylent Green, usually an even 50-50 on those. I do feed them it's a veggie pellet, and I get it from, it's been a while because I bought so much of it. I like to buy fish food in like bulk or big containers, portion out what I'm going to use, and then I vacuum seal all the rest. But I think it's called Your Fish Stuff. And I forget if it's spirulina pellet or just a veggie pellet, but I feed that because it has really good ingredients. From Ken's Fish, he also has a premium veggie stick that has really good ingredients. I mean, we're talking squash and spinach and zucchini and carrot, some really good natural foods in there. And then I do feed a New Life Spectrum. There's an algae pellet that the fish really like as well. Now, with that being said, Stephanie, the rumor that there's a lot of myths and rumors floating around on the web and the interweb. You can feed a little bit of protein to some of those fish. In fact, out in your neck of the woods, out in California, I don't know if you know Eric Thomas at all, but he's a professor, and I believe he's teaching at Berkeley. I could be wrong on that.
Yes, I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he's been breeding the 397s for a long time, before I had them. But I talked to him at Cataclysm a couple years ago, and he actually triggers his L397s with diced up cocktail shrimp.
Oh, really? That's so interesting.
Yep. And I've triggered mine with frozen bloodworms. So they can have some protein. You just don't want to feed protein consecutive days. But a couple times a week is not going to hurt them, from everything that I've been told and from my conversation with Dr. Eric. Yeah. But
nice.
My primary foods, to answer your question, rapashi, a couple of the veggie pellets, New Life Spectrum, algae pellets, or veggie pellets. That's the staples.
Northman has a really good veggie pellet that I use.
Yeah,
also.
That's the one. That's one of them that I feed as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom Lunatic Fringe, aka Chewy, wants to know if you have any thoughts on breeding Barancistrus species.
Nope. If you talk about the Barancistrus, and a lot of people, you hear that, and right away you're thinking gold nugget. Gold nuggets take a cajillion years to reach sexual maturity. Probably no one on the stream has ever seen a fully grown adult gold nugget Pleco, and their needs usually aren't addressed and met with a lot of the aquarists or hobbyists. And most of those things end up dying. What you see in the stores are all juveniles, but they get big and kind of gnarly looking. And the adult form, they're gorgeous fish, but they don't look anything like juveniles. But I don't know if they're being bred in captivity or if that's been done yet. But just because of the amount of time it takes to grow a lot of those species out, at least that particular species, it's not something that I'm not gonna take on that task. I'll leave that for the experts. So. That's beyond my skill level, Chewy. So,
Bunny Viper added to your comment about not feeding high protein on consecutive days. She says she never does meaty foods 2 days in a row on her Plecos.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. We have come to the end of questions for now.
Okay, I do have a couple other things I do want to show.
Awesome.
When it comes to my Pleco tanks, I'm going to cover myself again here real quick. When it comes to my Pleco tanks, you're going to notice that a lot of them are kind of set up the same way. I have caves. I usually have more caves than fish. And then driftwood. I have driftwood in all of my Pleco caves, or Pleco caves in all my Pleco tanks. But I always like the, sand substrate. I don't like bare bottom tanks. I'm not a fan of it for Plecos. I like the sand substrate. I always put excess caves in there, slate tiles to stack the caves, or porcelain tiles to stack, and then driftwood as well. But that's like how I like to keep my Pleco tanks. And then as far as like Corydoras tanks, let me show a couple pictures here. All of my Corydoras tanks are very similar. Sand substrate, always sand, 100% of the time sand. And I know that there may be people that keep them on gravel. I don't, for many reasons, mainly because too much stuff falls in big gravel. It's just too porous. But when Ian Fuller and Rob McClure and Eric Bodrock say to keep Corydoras on sand 100% of the time, all the time, I'm going to follow their advice. All Corydoras love to dig into the sand for little, bits and morsels to chew on, and they'll be fine on gravel. I've never seen any barbells being damaged by that. I know that's a myth or a rumor. I don't know what it is, but I've never seen that. But all my Corydoras tanks are the same as well, where it's, they've got a place to hide. They've got a little shady area. They can get behind the sponge filters, behind the plants. But I also like to have plants in there because depending on the Corydoras, some Corydoras that I've had in my fish room only will spawn or drop their eggs on the plants. So I always like to have and it's usually Anubias or Bulbitis. They like those plants for some reason, but really? All of my Cory tanks are kind of the same way. A couple areas where they can get out of the light, where they can hide, where they can be in some shade, but then a big open area where they can come out and forage for food. So that is how I like to set my tanks up, and it's worked out pretty good for me so far. So
Greg Jones has a question.
Yes, Greg.
He wants to know suggestions for cooler subtropical Plecos and Corys.
I didn't quite hear that, Bob. What?
He just said suggestions for cooler subtropical Plecos and Corys.
Well, for the Corys, your scleromystax, I always, let's back up. A lot of the Ancestris can handle some of the cooler temperatures. So, in fact, I just picked up a real nice Pleco here just yesterday. Actually, I made the pilgrimage to pick these up. These are the Ancestris Wabenmunsters. Wabenmunster is German for honeycomb. And they've been in the hobby for a couple of years, but I picked up 10 little itty bitties. They can handle some cooler temps, but they do really prefer 78 to 80. But these guys, I've read some stuff online and talked to a couple people that actually, breed them pretty regularly. And they can handle some of those cooler temps like a lot of the other Ancestris. But really, if you want a cooler water fish, the Scleromystax barbatus, Greg, I don't know if you've ever kept Scleromystax. I showed it in my presentation here a little bit ago. Let me see. I do have a picture of one somewhere here, I think. Yeah. So that's a Scleromystax barbatus. And these guys come from southern Brazil, actually from about Rio down to the Uruguay border. A lot of the coastal tributaries, the water's a lot more temperate down there. So the temps down there, the water temp can sometimes be in the 50s. Now, sustained long term, I don't know if that would work, but usually in that 65 to 70, 72, they'll do just fine. So I don't have any heaters in any of my Scleromystax tanks, but these would go good with like Gymnogeophagus. A lot of those come from the same waters, from Uruguay. So they would work really well, these paired with Gymnogeophagus. Then I always envisioned, I keep Vietnamese white cloud minnows with my scleromystax, and then rainbow shiners is another species I've never kept a native that I think would probably pair very well with the scleromystax barbatus.
Two more questions. Sorry, Tom.
Those things are beautiful. I got to get some of them.
They are beautiful. Two questions, and I think they're coming from the same thought. Aquaball says, I have one more question. Do Corydoras lay eggs on? Do all Corydoras lay eggs on glass and plants? And then just below that, Amy 5 Aquatics says, have you ever had Corys lay eggs under the sun, under the sand?
Okay. The eggs that I picked today, okay, well, let me back up. That first question, do they all lay on glass?
And plants.
It depends on the Cory species. I have Corys that put all their eggs on the glass. I have Corys that put 90 to 95% of their eggs on plants. I have Corys that will spawn in spawning mops that are floating. I have Corydoras that will only spawn in spawning mops that are submerged and on the bottom of the tank. So it really depends on the Corydoras, and that's just my experience with my Corys that I keep. So you really have to know the Corydoras. Now, I showed those Corydoras black hillside. I don't think I have a clip or a still photo of them here, but I showed those. They were in the presentation. They just spawned for me, and they spawned on floating hornwort. I have some hornwort in that tank. All the eggs were on hornwort. There weren't any eggs on the glass. There were no eggs on any other surface. So that tells me that floating spawning mops would work well with that Cory. But my Corydoras bozemanii, they only spawn on mops that are on the bottom. Now, with that being said, I've never had any Corys spawn in the gravel, but I have had Corys drop eggs in the gravel as they were trying to find a place. My CW49s, they also spawn on spawning mops that are submerged. These guys here. But when I pick the eggs out of the mops, a lot of them will be covered in sand, like the female was, scooting around the bottom and collecting and stirring up the sand, and they were sticking to the eggs, getting inside of her little fin basket, if you will. But I've never really found any eggs. I know Eric Bodrock in his Cataclysm talk a few years ago, he talked about finding Corydoras eggs in sand. So, if he found it, it happens. So,
Right.
But
it looks like we've got about 5 minutes. We're in no rush, because that's plenty of time. But there aren't any other questions up. Is it okay with you if I bring you back down to the panel?
Well, I do want to offer some advice.
I'm on a stream.
Yep,
Thank you. I'll be in just a minute. I'm almost done.
Stephanie, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, guys.
I do have a few bits of advice that I want to offer people, Bob, if I could.
Sure. We've got plenty of time.
With plecos, more than anything, this actually is regarding plecos and fish rooms. You got to have patience. You don't build a collection like I do overnight. You don't build a collection and my collection is small compared to, Jeremy Bash, Rob McClure, and Eric Bodrock. Mine's teeny tiny compared to them. But even my collection, you don't build it overnight. You have to have patience. And if you do build a fish room like mine overnight, then you're in a career that I should have chosen, because it's expensive and I don't have that kind of money laying around to build this overnight. It takes time. But with plecos, you have to have time. And I think this is why they're not as popular in the hobby. Well, besides the fact that they like to hide a lot, you never see them. But it takes some species years and years and years. A chewy bench of the berry ancestris, the gold nugget takes years to mature. My brother's working with L14 Scoby ancestris. It takes years to grow out those big 12 to 14 inch plecos. So you have to have patience. That's number one. Number two, always buy the species that you want. And I forget if it was Maria or Bunny Viper or who it was that asked about 398s and 397s. You know, if you're considering both those, but you like one more than the other, get the one you like. A lot of people want to get zebra plecos, but it's maybe at a price point outside their comfort level. But then they buy something called the Colombian zebra, the chocolate zebra, all these zebra plecos. And usually when I talk to those people, they're not as happy with those fish. They buy the fish you want. It might cost you a little bit more up front. Save your money, just wait. Buy the fish you want. And you're going to enjoy it a lot more. You're going to have a lot more passion for those fish. The last bit of advice is know your limitations. And what I mean by that is if you're breeding like me, I have a fish room and it's a breeding for profit fish room, but it's more like breeding for covering my carrying costs. You don't get rich breeding. You don't make a lot of money breeding. You can cover your costs and your operating costs and maybe make a few extra bucks to buy some more fish and more tanks like I've done. But it's also not necessary to pick every egg or pull every spawn. You can get into a trap of producing too much, and then you got to buy more tanks, and then the next thing you know, you don't have the time to take care of any of the fish, and they all suffer. So know your limitations and know when to stop. I stopped picking Corydoras eggs weeks ago, except for the Bozeman eye. They dropped 70 eggs today, and the black Schultz eye, because the blacks are new to my fish room and I want to try it. The Bozeman eye, I picked those eggs because I had a really bad year with them, and if they drop 60, 70 eggs, I'm going to pick them and give them a try. My L134s, I'm going to continue to pull those when I can, but know your limitations and don't, if you have enough fry, it's okay to not pick another spawn. I haven't picked orange Venezuelan spawn, Scleromystax barbatus spawn. I haven't picked any of those eggs for months now. So,
Wow.
Only grow out as many, pick as many spawns and have as many growths as you think you can properly care for. Because at the end of the day, if you have too many, you're not doing the fish any favor and you're not doing yourself or the species. So, and then one last thing, the device of the day. A lot of people have fish rooms, and everyone that has a fish room has probably overfilled their tank at one point.
I love that device.
I don't know why this isn't talked about more, but if you are like me and you have multiple tanks and you get easily distracted, pick one of these up, the Watchdog water alarm. Now, most people are going to demonstrate this, and this is going to sit on the ground. And if there's water on the floor, it goes off. But this actually comes off and it has this tether. So I hook this on a rack and then I hang this inside the tank. And once that water comes up and hits these little sensors, it's time for me to start paying attention again. Otherwise, I'm going to have a wet floor. But a wet floor on I have a concrete floor in my fish room. So if it gets a little wet, it gets a little wet. But I know there's also some tanks that people have that are on carpet. So I think when I bought this, it was like $12. It's going to save you a lot of hassle, and it's going to save you some frustrated conversations with your significant other if you accidentally flooded the fish room or your house with 10, 20 gallons of water. So look at picking one of these things up. It saved my rear end a few times. So anyways.
Thank you. That's great advice.
So first off, I have used that at my store for the longest time. Bob's probably heard that beat. When he's been in the store, because we're always overflowing a bucket or overflowing this or that. But I do have one question.
Yes, sir.
Do all Plecos require wood?
I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to answer that. I can't answer that. I'm not qualified to answer that. Respectfully. But the people that I talk to, I talk to a lot of people in the Pleco circle. There's a core group of people that I associate with and get advice from. Most of us keep some wood in there because most Plecos do like to rasp on wood. Now, with that being said, I don't have any wood in with my zebra Plecos, but I'm going to get some and put some in there. My son's going to give me some extra Malaysian driftwood that he has and a couple other pieces. So,
but you also feed with Repashy morning wood, so as a supplement. Well,
yeah, but not my high pan citrus. I don't feed that to my high pan citrus. But But to answer your original question, do they all need it? I don't know if that's, that's kind of an absolute. So I don't know if that's necessarily true. So I can't answer that. But just talking amongst the people that I talk to, most plecos, most of them do like to, rasp for biofilm on wood. So that's the best I can answer it. Sorry, but I'm not going to put myself out there as an expert to answer that on behalf of all Pleco species. So
I have something to share with that, if you don't mind, really quick. In my 236 tank, I have a large piece of Malaysian driftwood, and I've had these fish for over 3 years. And in the center part of, somehow they've dug out like a middle piece that's over 3 years, it's become larger and larger. I don't know if that's just the normal degradation of the wood, or if that's them chewing and rasping and for biofilm. But I've noticed over 3 years that little center hole has gotten larger and larger and larger. So just some experience.
Yeah, that's I've seen that in some of my high pan tanks as well, Stephanie, and with my Picoltias and. Yeah, so I do want to mention one more thing, if I could, Bob. There
you
was.
Need to go back up?
No, this is fine. I know a lot of people ask if they should breed in colonies or if trios are better to breed plecos, and I colony breed is what I do. But I know I know somebody down in Iowa that likes to breed with trios, and he has like 40. L46 zebra pleco breeding females right now, and he just breeds in trios. But I heard something on the interweb here recently that really isn't, I don't want to say isn't accurate, but one of the reasons he breeds in trios is not because the male does all the work and then when the female's ready to drop eggs or spawn again, they want that female to go to a different male because that male's going to be too exhausted. Most females are going to have, at least in my experience and the people that I talk to, those females are always going to have a particular male that they like to spawn with. But the male, if he's by himself, doesn't necessarily feel competitive pressure and sometimes can get lazy. So that second male kind of adds functions like competition, if you will. And I mentioned earlier, my L494 tank, I have 10 adults in there. I have one male. That's it. And you can see how hairy he is. The back of his body looks like a darn toothbrush. Yeah. But I've got all these other females that are knocking on his door every night wanting a date. And he just ain't interested. So I've been trying to find more L494s, and, it was shared to me that I need to get another male in there so he feels more competitive pressure. So just wanted to pass that on, that trios does work quite a bit. A lot of people are successful. I colony breed, but the reason for trios isn't necessarily so the female can bounce back and forth between males, because usually the females take 4 weeks once they're breeding, when they drop eggs, 4 weeks or so before they're ready to drop more. Within 4 weeks, pleco eggs hatch in 5-6 days, then another week, and most people have them out of the cave. Within 2 weeks, those things have long abandoned the cave. So that male has been feeding and eating and out and about well over a week, maybe as much as 2 weeks before the female is ready to go again. So that's my experience in my fish room. So keep that in mind. Other people might have a different experience, but that's my fish in my fish room and what I've seen. So take it with a grain of salt.
When you said that about knocking on the door, I started to quip, I want to come back as that Pleco, but I don't know about the just eating 1 or 2 weeks out a month. I don't know about that. Some quick feedback in the chat, some instant feedback, as Mark Stralson said, hard to look at the chat when there's so many cool fish on the screen. Yeah. And Aquaval's George has already put some spawning mops in his Cory tanks just from your advice. So.
Oh. Good. Glad to help. Hopefully you have some success. So
I wish this was a 2-hour stream.
I do too. I'll talk to Tom.
Maybe we should do a part 2.
I'll talk to him. Maybe. I'll talk to him. Okay.
Yeah, just a question and answer. I think a lot of people would come back with a lot of questions.
And I know I'm going to go back and watch the presentation again because that was really, really interesting.
A lot of good information, great information.
Really helpful.
As long as we have questions and you want to have him back, I'll see if we can do it.
I do wish we had a little more time because I only covered about half of what I have,
There
noted.
you go.
There you go. Let's do another one.
There you go. We'll get it set up then. All right. Awesome.
And also, Tom, I want to thank you for the video on your Cory eggs hatching with the Zis breeder. That's how I finally had success in getting my Cory eggs to hatch, because they were fungusing with everything else I was doing. So that's what worked.
Do you notice how they always fungus on like day 3?
Yes, it's day 3 or 4 for me.
Day 1 they look fine. Day 2 they don't, and when they're supposed to be hatching, all of a sudden they get white and hairy. I'm not sure why that is yet, and I'm going to try. I'm trying to get that answered. I'm going to reach out to a couple people, but what I found is, just that increased water flow has helped. But strangely enough, though, Stephanie, I was like 99% of everyone else that hatched Corys. I just put them in one of those little hang-on breeder boxes, and I had no issues with that in the past. But something happened this year, and I don't know what it is. Something was different.
Same thing with me. I used to have no problems hatching Cory eggs, and then this year, I don't know. Maybe it's something in the water. I don't know.
I don't know that we're drawing off the same aquifer, but my brother in his fish room, he experienced the same exact phenomena. He just could not get anything to hatch.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is.
Maybe it's coincidence.
But yeah, it
thanks
probably
for that.
is. But glad to help.
Okay. I choked on that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop us right here, hoping that we can have TM Aquatics Tom back again. I'll certainly be talking to him. And guys, we can hang out here and talk as long as we want, but I don't want to go over Kenny. I think he's already started. So everybody that's interested, go on over to Danica Aquatics, and he's got an awesome channel. And he committed to come on as our guest. A couple of weeks ago, I asked him in a live stream, no pressure. So we'll be seeing Kenny over here soon, I hope. So thank you so much, Tom. Awesome presentation. Awesome.
Appreciate the invite. Thank you.
See you guys. Thanks everybody for